All right. We're going to take a look tonight at just one parable, and that's the parable of the rich fool, as it's named by some people. The man who decided to build bigger barns. We find this in Luke chapter 12, in verses 13 through 21. We have the beginning of the context, at least, in verse 13, or at least the immediate context. And so we see here, then one from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, "The ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, 'What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops?' So he said, 'I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" So the beginning of this parable is someone who seems to be asking something reasonable, where he says, "Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." I mean, shouldn't that happen? But Jesus says, that's not my job. That's for a judge or an arbitrator to deal with if there's a problem there. But whichever side you are on, whether you're holding on to the inheritance and not dividing it with your brother out of covetousness, or covetousness is driving you to demand that your brother divide the inheritance with you, even though perhaps it's not for you. He says, here's what you need to understand. It's not about just what does law allow you to get. It's about how should you think about your riches, what God has blessed you with. And so in this parable, we have the land of a rich man being very productive. So he's already rich, but now he's very rich because all this land that he owns grows a lot of crops. And the idea is that whatever we receive, it's a blessing from God. It says that the land was productive. It doesn't say he was productive. I mean, he had to do some work or extend some money at least, invest something in order to plant those crops. But as we've seen from other parables, the farmer does not make the crops grow. God does. And so he's been blessed with things from God. And that's true of everything we get. All of us, whether we're farmers or we work at a job, we're blessed with that job. God has provided for us. We are provided the things that are in the store that we can buy, and we're provided the ability to buy it. So we have these blessings, and they're blessings from God, even if we are working hard, but not everybody has the same opportunities that everybody else does. Whatever blessing we receive, we should be grateful for that and recognize that it truly is a blessing from God. And so this rich man decides to tear down his barns and build bigger barns and store everything for himself. So he can just retire and just keep it for himself. And so we see he has far more than he needs, but he decides to keep it for himself anyway. Well, it's for the future, right? It's for the future him. And he would say to himself that he had many goods laid up for many years to come, and he could just relax and enjoy himself. So he thought of only using his huge blessings only for himself. He was not thinking of others and what he could do with what God had blessed him to be a blessing to others who would need that food. So, in the parable, it says that God spoke to this rich man, calls him a fool, and tells him that his soul is required that night. We don't know how many years we have to use what God has blessed us with. So we should be using what he gives for what is needed right now. So don't think about many years in the future, I might need this. If there are needs that people have right now that you can be helping with. It's not to say that it's wrong to have money for emergencies, to have money for the future when you cannot work anymore. But this man was going to retire at a young age with the only thought of taking his ease, right? Just relaxing. Maybe, today we might think if somebody can make a lot of money, get really rich, they can retire young, travel the world, whatever they want to do, right? And yet what they should be doing with those blessings is helping others who need that money right now for emergencies, for things that are needed now, for food. And this man was going to die that night and not even get to enjoy all of these things. But if he had thought of the people in need, well, he might have still died that night, but he would have used it. He would have used that money for what is good. And so Jesus says, so is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. If we don't use the resources that God gives us for God's purposes, we are fools. We're not given these things to be selfish. We're not given these things to just use for our own pleasure. It is for us to use in God's service. If you get rich and you're able to retire so that you can spend more time doing the work of the Lord, wonderful. But if you're just thinking of, I'm just going to relax and live a pleasant life and not think about anybody else, you're a fool. That is not how we should be thinking, because these are blessings from God. We didn't make ourselves rich. And so if we become in possession of more than what we need, we should be thinking of others that do not have what they need. And I want us to talk about the rest of this context. After this parable, Jesus connects this with the idea of thinking about tomorrow. Okay, let's go ahead and read these next verses 22 through 34. Then he said to his disciples, "Therefore, I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. Life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap, which have neither storehouse nor barn, and God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? If you then are not able to do the least, why are you anxious for the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. And yet I say to you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. If then God so clothes the grass, which today is in the field and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you should eat or what you should drink, nor have an anxious mind. For all these things the nations of the world seek after, and your Father knows that you need these things. But seek the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added to you. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell what you have and give alms. Provide yourselves money bags which do not grow old, a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So he starts this immediately after the parable, and he says, therefore. So he's making a connection to the parable and what he's saying here. And what we find is this rich man was, I suppose, in a sense, anxious about what he would eat and drink tomorrow. Or rather, he was thinking about many years in the future. I have enough for many years. But Jesus says, you don't need to be worried about that. If you have something you can do to store up treasure in heaven now, do it. Don't keep that money for the future or the food for the future. If you can use it now for something God wants you to do. Seek the kingdom first. It's not about throwing away the money. It's not about wasting it. It's about using it for God's purposes, about using it to actually be helpful, and about making sure that you're storing up your treasure in heaven, that is your focus. When we talk about storing up money for the future, it seems wise. Jesus says that's what all the nations do. They're concerned about food and clothing. Their focus is there. But he says that's not how we're to think. We're not supposed to think like everybody else. These lessons on holiness Brother Gazu is giving us partly are emphasizing this point. We are not to think like the world. If we have more than what we need now and somebody else needs it now, use it for those who need it now. If you're afraid you won't have enough and you'll starve in the future because you're generous now, you don't have faith. God has already provided what you have now. He gave you that extra. He can provide for you in the future. Believe in him. You will have what you need if you will use it for God's purposes. Store up treasure in heaven by selling what you have in order to help those in need. That's what Jesus said. If your focus is on having the things for yourself in just the short-term future on earth, however long that may be, it's short-term, it shows your heart is in this life. Your focus is here, just like the rest of the world. But if you're willing to give up financial security in order to help others in need, because you've got your focus on these eternal riches in heaven, it shows your heart's with God, the one who gave you these things. He intends for you to use these things for his glory. And now you're saying, okay, I trust him. I'm going to do with them what he tells me to do with them. I'm going to seek the kingdom first and not the things of this world. So that's the parable of the rich fool. There may be some other lessons that you might draw out of it, but I hope that this connection that Jesus himself makes is helpful to us in thinking through it. Thank you.